Welcome back. In the previous video, we did a few changes on the styling of our application. We also added some checkboxes so that we could toggle our tasks as completed or not. And in this video, we will integrate Cypress into our project. Cypress is an end-to-end testing library. It makes it really easy and really fun to write end-to-end tests. So for us, end-to-end tests, basically we're going to open a browser and we will see that right after we integrate Cypress. But the goal is we're going to open a browser as if a real user was accessing this app from their Google Chrome, from their Firefox, and we're going to perform a couple of user journeys. We're going to perform a couple of sequential actions that we expect our users to perform, and we want to make sure that these actions are working properly. We already have a bunch of tests in our project, and that's great because these tests are quick to write and they give us also some degree of confidence, but there are a couple of limitations here. To begin with, we are rendering a single component here, and this single component is basically, it's not integrated with other components. If we have a look at the app here, we have the tasks component, and then the tasks component has the create task next to the task list. If we are rendering just the create task component, we are not really testing the interaction between the two. Oh yeah, Laura, but what you're saying is actually not really true, because we have the tasks component here and we're actually testing the tasks component in this file. And that's absolutely right, but still we are rendering a single component. We are not testing the application as a whole. Imagine later on that this component makes some network requests and maybe we want to actually test how the whole flow works, and this is where the end-to-end tests come into play. They go beyond unit and integration tests, and they test your application as a final user would actually use it. This gives us a lot of confidence, and it makes sure that all the important user journeys, they are documented and they are properly tested every time we change the application. All right, with that said, let's start integrating the Cypress library. I'm going to install as a dev dependency. And what I want to do here is I want to install the version 9.7.0. Okay, so I believe that is one of the latest versions. And I just want to make sure we all have the same versions installed so that we can run things similarly. If you're installing a slightly later version like 9.7.x or something, or 9.8.x, this may still work. I think that most of them will work. But for the purposes of us following together, let's focus on 9.7.0. All right, so once I have this, the next step I'm gonna perform is just I will run npx cypress open. What this will do is this will download whatever dependencies, whatever things we need to download for Cypress, and then it's gonna open this Cypress. It's like a GUI. It's a user interface where we'll see. This is basically the setup that comes out of the box with Cypress. You can see there are a bunch of tests here, and we could run these tests if we want to. So if I click here, you will see it's going to open a browser and it's going to test the todo.spec.js. So this is nothing related to what we are developing here, but as you can see, this is how Cypress actually works. Okay, so you see we have all the different steps it took. We have the different stages here during the execution. It's actually a browser, okay? We can actually highlight the elements that we are selecting here. So this is pretty cool. With that being said, it may sound like Cypress is already integrated into our project, but there are a few little things we want to do. First of all, you see that we have a .js here. This we don't want, okay? We don't want, we want to work with TypeScript as much as possible. And plus, we also have a bunch of advanced examples. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to delete them. If you want to, and I would highly encourage you to do so, take your time and have a look through them so you can see the different things that you can do with Cypress. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to stop running this. I'm going to close this GUI, and I'm coming back to my project here. You can see there are a couple of things that popped up. Okay, we have the Cypress JSON here, and we have a Cypress folder. And in this Cypress folder, we have a bunch of stuff. We have the integration folder where all our tests live in. So they're all here. Oops. They are all here. And we also have a couple of other things. We have plugins if we want to use plugins here. And you see it's already complaining. We're going to fix all that. Don't worry about it. And we have a bunch of commands and a bunch of a file index.js. Okay, so all that we may have a look at. I'm not sure how much we need to customize it, but really the core is in this integration folder. The fixtures folder gives us a possibility of defining data for the tests, what is called a fixture. We may investigate this, we may use this later, but for now, let's focus on actually doing the little changes we want to do to Cypress so that it also works properly with TypeScript in our project. First things first is I'm going to delete this folder. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of it. I don't want all the advanced examples running. And the next thing I want to do is I want to be able to run Cypress from our package.json. But before we actually do that, let's refactor this. Let's rename it. We're not going to search for any references. We're just going to rename this to .ts. Okay, once I refactor this, you will see that, well, oops, okay. A lot of things are actually popping up here, and there are lots of errors. Actually, this is a more concerning error because as you can see, there are some TypeScript problems. We want to isolate the Cypress folder. We want to make its own TypeScript project for Cypress, and we're going to do that by creating a new file that's going to be called tsconfig.json. Very similar to the one that we have here in our root directory. Now, this tsconfig.json that we have here, we actually want to extend. So we want to, not exclude, but extend. We want to extend our base tsconfig file. So we'll just push the tsconfig from our root directory. And then we want to set a couple of compiler options. And the first one is we want to make sure we are not emitting anything. So we just, emitting here means once I run the TypeScript compiler, it's going to give me the compiled JavaScript files. We don't want to do that. We're not interested in the compiled test files. We just want to make sure that all our TypeScript errors are gone and that we have a properly coded test file. We're not really interested in deploying this test, like the JavaScript version of these test files anywhere. So we don't really need the output of the compiler. We just need the checks, the type checking, and the type safety that it gives to us. The next thing, we actually need to set up a couple of types. And the first one, we want to include the Cypress types and the node types. Okay, so if you have a look here, then it's still showing that it cannot be compiled under the isolated modules because it is considered a global script file. So there is another little flag here that we can turn off. Once we set isolated modules to off, then you should see this warning, or I'm not so sure actually. Let's see. Let's continue doing here. We're going to include the files because that's what's missing as well. We want to make sure that we are including everything here, node modules, and that's going to be the Cypress folder. And then here we're going to include all the files within our directory. All right, so all the files that end with a TypeScript extension. So now once I come back to the previous file, you will see that the error on the describe is gone and we are good to go. There are still a few prettier errors here and we're going to fix them in a bit, but let's first continue splitting up our projects and making sure that everything works nicely with TypeScript. So the first thing I'm going to do is I will come to the package.json file and I want to change this tsc check command because I want to extend it. I want to actually have a separate one for my app. Okay, so for the app, I'm going to have this one. I'm going to pass the project as being the TypeScript config that I have here locally. So in this exact directory. Okay, so I pass this here. And that's going to be just for my app. So in my tsconfig.json file here, we have a couple of, so we are including only the files from the source directory. We are not including files from the Cypress directory, which means that, let me just clean this up. If I run my tsc check app, so check-app, that will work or that will examine only the files in our source directory. There are no problems within our source directory, as we already know, but there are still a few problems within the Cypress directory. So what I'm going to do is I'll add another command here, and that's going to be check Cypress. So now I'm not going to take the root tsconfig, I'm going to take the tsconfig from our Cypress directory. And now if I run npm run tsc check Cypress, then you will see that this should emit a couple of errors. All right, it doesn't. And that's actually just because it looks at the TypeScript files, and this TypeScript file is good to go. It's just prettier errors here, so formatting errors. However, we didn't migrate the plugins file, right? So we didn't migrate this index.js. You see there are a couple of errors here. This kind of, it's not being investigated by TypeScript because we are not including the JS files. So let's just include the TypeScript files, or actually, let's refactor this to .ts and let's try running the check again. Now we see that we have a bunch of errors here and we want to get rid of these errors. So they have, what this is saying is that they implicitly have an any type. So for us here, we don't want to use any, but we also don't know how these things look like. So I'm just going to set them to unknown. I'm going to save this and let's run again. Let's see what happens. All right, so now it's looking better, but still we are actually having this unused parameter errors from ESLint. Actually, if I run now lint, okay, that's not going to give us any error because we are linting only the source folder or only the source directory. So let's come back here and we're going to add this here. We're going to modify this to lint not only the source but also the Cypress directory. And while we are at it, we can actually also modify the format and the format check to actually check two directories. Now, if I run the lint, then we should get two errors because our IDE is complaining. All right, not only two, but also the prettier errors. So we can format everything. You see that there are a bunch of errors from prettier here. We're going to format this later, but let's focus here. So we see that we have the on is defined but never used, and the config is defined but never used. These are in this file here. So one way that I like is, one way that I like to approach this is to actually pass an underscore, okay? And then we can set up a custom rule in our ESLint RC file, and that's very, that's very interesting. That's probably because I don't have the, I didn't format this with indent 2. So let's do this now. If I click here on view, I can actually come under appearance and then status bar. You see that I have 4 spaces here, and then I can reindent the file with 2 spaces, and that's looking much better. Okay, so very little change here on the ESLint file, just so that it stops complaining. And what I want to change here is, you see this line, no unused vars. This is actually the same error here that I'm having. So what I want to do is I want to add an additional or an option, and that's called args ignore pattern. So this will allow me to ignore any argument that starts with an underscore, and then it's not going to complain anymore about those arguments in our index.ts file. So now you see that the errors are gone. And once I run the lint command again, we should have just 31 errors rather than 33. Perfect. And they're all prettier errors. So if we run npm run format, this will actually fix all of them for us. You see that we have here a couple of files were modified. And once I run the lint command again, then you see that everything is working just fine. Okay. Let's change now the support here. We want to refactor this to also be TS. And we want to refactor the index.js here to also be index.ts. If I have a look here, everything is commented out. I'm not going to touch this file again, or I'm not going to touch this file now, but basically this is not going to give us any additional error. So if I run the lint command again, then everything should be in order. Perfect, I'm getting no errors. And now the last thing I want to do is I want to change the tsc:check command to actually run our tsc check app and our tsc check Cypress. So now once I run npm run tsc check, this will actually check both directories. Going to start with our source directory, and then it will go and examine the Cypress directory. Great, looking good. So let's have a little check on how our tests are doing, and let's see what's going to happen. So I'm just going to run the test command. Oh, and as you can see here, we are actually running a test from within the Cypress directory. Now, this is not going to pass. Okay, this is going to break. And as you can see here, there are a bunch of things happening. The bottom line is I don't want to run the Cypress tests directly with Jest. I want to run the Cypress tests with a command called Cypress run. Okay, so I'm going to say here nps Cypress run, and let's see what's going to happen now. As you can see, it's already running here. So it's already doing some progress. It's checking everything. It has passed. It has compiled a nice video for us. So if we actually want to watch a video of our test. So if I just click here, oops, that's actually, I should open this maybe in QuickTime, but I'm actually using QuickTime to record this. I don't know how that's going to work. But anyway, if you want to check that, you have an MP4 video. I'm not really interested in that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I will also add the Cypress /videos here to my git ignore so that this doesn't really get committed. Okay, because again, this can start, I mean, these are video files, doesn't matter how small they are. It's just for us doesn't make sense to commit them. If we want to check them locally, that's fine, but we don't need them to actually be committed to our repository. All right, but as you can see, we want to run the Cypress tests by using this command run. So the first thing we want to do is we just want to focus or limit the Jest commands to everything that is within the source directory. So if you run the test command now, you will see that Jest will actually identify only, or it will find only 3 tests. These are the ones we're interested in. And they're going to run just fine as they were before. Everything is going to pass, no big problems. And the last thing we want to do here, we want to add a test :e2e command. The test :e2e command is going to execute Cypress, run, and for us here, let's run it with the headed flag. In the latest versions of Cypress, as you saw here, it runs without opening the browser. If we want to open the browser, we need to pass this -- headed, the headed flag. So if now we run test :e2e, then we should actually see a nice browser, a Chrome browser popping up, and it's here behind the scenes. So there you go. And then as you can see, it's actually executing the tests. The last thing I want to do here is you see that the cypress.json file, it is still in the root directory. And I would like to keep things isolated to their own directories. So what we will do is we'll come here within the Cypress folder, we'll create a new directory, and we're going to call this config. And within the config, we'll just actually migrate the Cypress, not migrate, but just move the Cypress file to our config directory. And here we will refactor it, and we're going to rename it, and we'll say Cypress base.json. As you can see, this is already hinting towards the fact we will have multiple config files for different environments, right? We want to have one config file for our local environment. We're going to have one config file for our CI environment. So the config here is still empty. We're not going to touch it for now. The goal of this video is to just execute the tests themselves and make sure that Cypress is properly integrated. Let's run it again, and I'm curious whether what's going to happen without the config file, and that's perfect. It cannot find it, so we do need to pass here a config-file option, which tells Cypress to look into the Cypress directory, the config folder, and the Cypress base.json file. Once I save this and I execute the command again, then we should see this running properly. There you go. There you have it. Nothing new. Great. Let's see here git status, and let's just have a look at all the files that we are committing here. I'm going to add all of them. So I'm going to do a bulk add, And let's commit this and say feed integrated Cypress into the project. As you can see here, it is running all the pre-commit hooks that we have so that we make sure we are committing everything properly. We're not introducing any TypeScript errors, we are not introducing any linting errors, and we are making sure that we are formatting our files. All right, cool, everything committed, but you might be asking yourself or actually asking me, what do we do with Cypress? We have it to run some E2E tests, but we haven't done anything yet. And that's true. I want to keep things slightly shorter per video. So in the next video, we're going to come back and we're going to change our integration here, the integration folder, the spec file that we have. We're going to change this and use our actual app. And we're going to discuss a little bit better how the flow, the entire flow is going to work, because if I actually open this, so let me just run the E2E test again, you will see that it actually needs to open a URL. Let's have a look here at the top. You see that it will open a URL and then it's going to actually execute based on this URL here. So we need to do a little bit of work before we can, or actually it is recommended that we just automate a few things to initialize a local server. And this is for our local setup, okay? We're going to initialize a local server, run the Cypress test on this local server, and make sure that everything is passing. That is for the next video. And then afterwards, we're going to integrate this into the CI/CD environment in our GitHub Actions. This is slightly different. But anyway, like let's not go too much ahead of ourselves, but we will spend a couple of videos making sure that we have a very nice, very solid setup for Cypress. And in the video of the CI/CD, it's actually going to be pretty cool because we will kind of deploy a temporary version to a quote-unquote dev environment, and then we're going to take that URL and we're going to use that URL in our Cypress tests. You see here that the Cypress is actually opening a URL on line 20, so it's just visiting the URL, and we want to visit a temporary dev environment that we're going to create so that we run the tests in an actual remote live server. We don't want to run the end-to-end tests in the CI/CD workflow. We don't want to run them in a local version of our server running. We want to run them against an actual environment as a user would access it. Pretty cool, pretty cool. As you can see, there are lots of things, lots of cool stuff that we can do here, even with a small project as we have now. So thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next video when we update the integration folder here of Cypress to actually write tests for the app we are developing. Thank you, and until the next video.